filter page, now this is, of course, the only other major screen in Mastermind. Everything else is just kind of small things like preferences and looking at the query and so on. But as far as doing settings for how your query is going to go, really that's set by the main screen out here and the filter screen here. Those are the only two macro query modifying screens. So the other way that I might choose to filter what is included would be to either use a Goldmine filter, use a Goldmine group, or, as is most commonly done, filter against key fields. So the key fields, and on yours, your key fields should show up here the same as they do on the Goldmine screen itself. Probably the most common way to limit this, aside from the date, would be to say, okay, I'm not interested in calls to vendors, I'm not interested in calls to employees, I'm not interested in calls to certain classes of accounts that we have in our database. I'm really only interested in calls to potential customers. Because again, remember, I'm thinking of this from a sales manager's point of view. So potential customers and maybe customers both. So if that's the case, then I should have in my key values a relatively easy way of isolating on potential customers and customers. Usually they're called prospects, they're called suspects. If you've got A, B, and C as a means of grading your prospects, maybe your A's and B's you want, but not your C's, that sort of thing. The key thing to remember here is that as we're sort of setting the umbrella parameters for what's in our query, the broader a net you cast here, the more information you're going to be able to have when you actually get in there and manipulate. So if you want to ultimately be, let's say, comparing your A's, B's, and C's, then don't exclude the C's up here up front, but do exclude stuff that you know is not ever going to be a part of this examination. So up front here, probably to keep things simple for me, I'll say I've already done a 2005 on here, but I might also say we're a software company, so we sell to end users. In this case, we sell to end users of Goldmine. So I might turn off, well, I'm not interested in the calls to employees. I've got different flavors of end user in here, so I'll leave all those on. But I've got here former employees, I've got former Goldmine resellers, I've got Front Range, which is the publisher of Goldmine, a number of things here that I may or may not want to include. So I could pick and choose among those. And I might also down here all the way to the bottom in my key values and say, don't include what we call other values for account type. Other values means values that could be in that field that are not in the lookups for that field. Because essentially what you see here in this list, unlike inside of Mastermind Excel Workbook, what you see is the list of all values that are actually in the Goldmine data. What you see here is the list of all values that are in your lookups. In other words, the list of allowed values here, which does not necessarily coincide with what you actually have in your data. Because if you've been allowing people to put in values that are not there, you would see other stuff. So in the Mastermind dialog here, we essentially show you all the lookups and then add this one additional item, other values. So if you want to turn off all of those, essentially, you could go down and just, as I've done here, and uncheck. So that essentially is another major way of reducing the clutter that would wind up inside this report if you know that under no circumstances are you going to be interested in calls to those other places. So all I've done is reduce the size of the query that's going to underlie this and gotten it down to some select segments of it. By the way, something else that's really useful is to get yourself an initial count based on the parameters that you've set. And usually that'll take a few seconds in SQL. If you're on DBase, you could be waiting for a while for an answer to come back from DBase, so you may want to use the count button sparingly. But this is actually a good way of just getting an initial idea. Okay, how many records am I going to be pulling in here? By the way, 33,029. That would be the number of records that I got in here. Can anybody tell me what's the significance of that number as far as, I don't mean the specific number 33,029, but what significance of that in relation to functionality in my report? Why might I want to actually get the number down a little bit lower than that?
Yeah, it can only pull so many contacts per report.
That's close. There is a limitation as far as how many field items can show up in a field in the pivot table. Mike, what do you suppose would be a number that I'd want to get lower than if this is what I'm close to? Do you happen to remember that number? The number is 32,767. And the significance of that number is for pivot tables, that's the maximum number of unique items that a pivot field can have while displaying in a pivot table. Kind of an obscure fact there, but it's significant because sometimes when you create a mastermind report, you'll get a message up front that says, this and this field have too many unique items to be displayed in a pivot table. Most of you have probably experienced that at one time or another, and you may wonder exactly what that means. Essentially what it's saying is that field won't be able to display in your page area or your row area or your column area in your report. It's still available in the drill down. There's actually no limit to the number of records you can have in a report. For those of you who are on, let's say, XT or higher, this 32,000 limit is probably the significant one as far as individual field values showing. So if, let's say, when you complete calls, all of your references are unique. In other words, every time somebody completes a call, they put in, whatever they feel like into the reference field, then you're going to pretty quickly hit that 32,000, and that reference field is probably not going to be able to be pulled into the pivot table report. And if that's the case, then you might be thinking, all right, I want to get this number down below 32,000. What are some strategies for doing that?